It was a little bit difficult because you're working with really, really smart people. And so it can be a little bit intimidating when, you hear kind of the qualifications and all the projects that people have worked on before and, the school that they went to. But at a certain point, that was kind of motivation for me to say, like, well, I'm here and these are my peers. If these people are extraordinary, like maybe there's a chance that I'm extraordinary. Like maybe they didn't make a mistake. Maybe I belong here.
On the latest episode of How I Broke Into Tech, we chat with Mikey Miller, a business analyst at Accenture who broke into tech after working as a tire technician in Dallas, Texas. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed chatting with Mikey, and I think you will too. Mikey, let's start with your name, your role, and what kind of work you're doing at Accenture right now.
Yeah, so my name is Mikey Miller. My official role is Package Application Development Analyst. It's a bit of a mouthful, and it's not quite exactly what I do day to day. So I'd say I'm more of a business analyst. And so day to day, that could be working to help our client implement different applications. So one that I'm more familiar with would be ServiceNow. I've also had experience with Salesforce and Azure DevOps. So kind of my job is to get familiar with a technology, put together presentations, and help the client get comfortable with rolling that out.
Gotcha. So said another way, a client would get in touch with Accenture and want help implementing ServiceNow, and you're the person that they call when the bat signal goes up, and you're there to help walk them through it, get them up to speed, kind of make sure that they do the implementation the right way. Is that correct?
Yeah, kind of. It's not a bat signal, it's more like an M, but yeah, and we could be doing anything from what we'll do sometimes is like software recommendations. So a client will come to us and they'll ask, we have this situation, what would be the best platform for us to use? So we could do that, or we could do anything from putting it together and giving them long-term support and transitioning that to their team and anything in between.
How long have you been doing that?
Yeah, so I think I'm at 2 years and 10 months, and we'll round up to about 3 years.
What do you think so far?
Oh, I love it. I mean, it's really interesting because you're always working on many different things and no project is exactly the same. It's always a different kind of client team. It could be a completely different section of the business or even a different industry. So I think it's really cool because you get a lot of exposure to a lot of different things that I'm not sure that you would typically if your role was just one kind of job.
Yeah, makes sense. I think diversity of experiences makes work a lot more fun, right? If you show up every day and it's always a little bit different, that presents new challenges, new ways of thinking, and kind of continues to push you to get better. But you weren't always doing this. From what I understand before this, so 3 years at Accenture, and before this, you were a tire technician. Tell me a little bit about that. What was that like? How long were you doing that for?
Yeah, I've had quite a few jobs, and I'd say the ones that I've spent the most time in is as a forklift driver for different warehouses, moving product around, stashing it, and then I spent quite a bit of time at Discount Tire as a tire technician. And I'd say is probably one of my better experiences. I still look back at it pretty fondly, but it's really fun. I mean, it's super fast paced and it's very energetic. And I know a lot of places say that, but it is because you're on your feet, you're moving around, it's really physical, you're doing a lot, and there are always 10 or 15 cars that need to be worked on, so you're quick.
I'm sure the day goes by like that, huh?
You would think, but somehow it doesn't, because you just I don't know, somehow it doesn't sometimes, because you're like, man, I've done 10 cars, how has it only been an hour? Like, this doesn't make any sense. But yeah,
Your throughput is just out of control. So forklift driver and tire technician, though you pit those two jobs against each other, which one did you like better and why?
I'd say probably Discount Tire. It's a little bit more I want to say like autonomous. So as a tire technician, you could be talking to the customer and helping them understand like what went wrong, right? They might say like, I have a flat tire. I don't understand how I got this, right? And so you can point out and be like, oh, there's a nail here, or you haven't been inflating it to the right tire pressure, all kinds of that stuff like that. Or it could be, selling tires. I've done that a couple times, which is pretty fun. So helping them pick out what they need specifically. And so forklift driving, it is fun because, it's a big machine, but I think
Exactly.
you're a little bit more independent as somebody that works as a tire technician.
I'd love to chat a little bit more about what I imagine are some of the overlaps between dealing with customers, in the tire shop and working with clients in consulting, but maybe we can get to that in just a minute. Before we do, tell me about how you go from working as a tire technician to landing an amazing job as a business analyst at Accenture.
Yeah, so I've been looking out for new opportunities for some time just because I had known that long term I would like to do something a little bit different than what I had been working on before. And so around that time, that was kind of like a lot of the day in my life tech videos and things like that. So I got a lot of exposure to what that could be like. And so at about that same time, I got, the information about the Udacity challenge to get the scholarship, which is really interesting. And it was a really unique way to kind of approach a job application in my
What
mind.
what was that? Let's come back to kind of the job application, but what was the Udacity challenge for scholarship? Maybe you can just kind of describe that to the listeners.
Yeah, sorry, I think I'm moving too fast. So Udacity offers many different courses and nano degrees. And so they will do different scholarships for different programs, right? So that you can attend those courses at no cost. And so in my particular case, there was a challenge which was kind of do a certain section of that nano degree and complete it. And you could get the scholarship to complete a full nano degree. And at the end of that nano degree, you could interview at Accenture, which I thought was really cool. So you would do the challenge, and then you have a chance to actually participate in the full, however many months long course it was.
So you're at the tire shop and you say, I'm going to try this challenge. At the time, did you have other aspirations about getting into tech? Was that kind of the top of your stack rank of, career opportunities that you wanted to pursue? Were there other ones out there as well?
Yeah, so I had been, looking at a few different things, and for a long time, I thought I would work in as an air traffic controller. There was a family friend I knew, and he had been doing that, and he really liked it. So I had a lot of information about that. But to kind of just see what all is out there, um, it was definitely interesting to pursue this opportunity. So that's kind of just where I went, where I was like, let me see what I can work on.
So you heard about the challenge, you sign up. How did it go?
Yeah, I thought it was really fun and it was really engaging as far as like I was very anxious to see the results. So you do the challenge, which is again, it's like part of the nano degree, and you're working on it and you're doing the modules. And then I'm kind of waiting, and my fingers are crossed. Like, am I gonna get this? Am I gonna be accepted?
How long
Um,
did you have to wait for? Do you remember?
I can't remember. It couldn't have been that long because throughout the process there was a
Yeah.
lot more waiting for like interviews and things like that. So I don't think it was that bad in hindsight. Um, but it felt like a while. And then when I actually got the acceptance, I was like, wow, this is awesome. And it was a lot more motivating too because I had, worked for it. Like I had worked
Yeah.
to get to that point.
So you get accepted into the scholarship. At that point, you continue with the nano degree.
Yeah. So it's again like the challenge was part of the nano degrees. So then you're working through the rest of it. And the particular one I did was intro to programming. So I think it was HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Python. So quite a lot in there. And so you're working through each of these modules and you're learning, the principles of each and then applying kind of key ideas of each of those throughout the like learning portion of it. There's different kind of quizzes and assessments, and then there's actually projects, which were I think the most fun part of it.
You finished the projects, you finished the nano degree. How did Accenture fold into this? It was part of the scholarship to begin with, where you would get an interview with Accenture at the end of it. Tell me
Yeah,
about
so
that.
I think Accenture had put together the scholarship, or they had done some kind of organizing with Udacity to where they said, you know, I, I guess with any kind of scholarship, somebody is paying for you to do it. So uh, they were the ones paying for the scholarship, and so at the end of it, there's a chance, just like the challenge, there's a chance you get the nano degree. There's a chance you could interview, which I thought was really cool. So it was another layer of motivation to make sure I'm putting my best foot forward and getting through it.
What was the process like in between finishing the nano degree and figuring out if you were going to get the interview or not? Do you kind of remember what that was like and how that went?
Yeah, it was very anxious. It was a lot of tossing and turning. That one was a lot of waiting, and so there was a phone screening, and then after the phone screening you wait, and then you find out, do you get the actual interview, and then here's the dates for that. Here's, a little bit later you'll find out the information for, like, here is what the interview will cover and all the preparation. So it was a lot of practicing. I practiced kind of what I would say and the kind of stories that I would want to cover quite a bit. I also worked a lot on, like, my resume and my LinkedIn. So I thought Udacity had a really cool career services kind of module, right? So they put you through mock interviews. They help you work on your resume. They help you work on your LinkedIn and also your GitHub. So you kind of look like a well-rounded professional, because it's not enough in the interview to necessarily, talk about the skills. You have to show all these other kind of aspects that you could put together, like a coherent kind of story about what you've worked on.
And so you do the interviews, you're prepared, it sounds like, because you've done all of this prep. How did the interview go? What was the feeling of the interview? What was it like waiting for a decision?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was necessarily prepared for the interview. Uh, I had hoped I was prepared. I think I was. It went well, but they were very friendly, and you can never just take away some of the, like, worry that you have, though, I think. So everybody was very friendly and, like, respectful, but at the end of it, I'm still thinking, like, did I, you know, did I say this wrong? Should I have talked about this instead? So yeah, there's a lot of kind of wondering.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever walked away from an interview second guessing some of the things that I said and when, thinking to myself, oh man, I could have said that this way and it would have sounded so much better. But you're waiting and then eventually you get the call, I imagine, for the apprenticeship. What was that like?
Yeah, I remember the day. I don't know how exactly I knew. I think maybe they had emailed me, but they said, like, expect a call today. So that whole day I was kind of waiting, and I remember I was at work, and so just kind of checking my phone quite a bit, and then eventually I got the call, and I stepped outside and I said, like, this is it. Um, I'm gonna find out. Maybe I don't know if I'm gonna get the job, but I'm gonna find out. And so the HR partner who had given me the news, she was, really friendly and nice. She told me, like, they really liked your interview. We'd like to offer you the position, and it didn't quite feel real. I was a little bit like, where are the cameras? Like, this is probably a prank, but yeah, it was great.
What was the apprenticeship like when you started? Do you remember what you were working on at first? Is it similar to what you're working on now?
Yeah, I think it was pretty similar. To start off, I guess, to give context to what the apprenticeship is you, for Accenture, the apprenticeship is you work for 12 months as an apprentice, and then you have the kind of chance again, like, to be given a full-time position. So the apprenticeship itself, you are a full-time employee. You do work, 40 hours a week, and you're working with other analysts. Um, but then, it's more for experience. So there's the chance that maybe after a year, maybe you need to find a different kind of job, and you can do that. So the project that I was working on, it was, I think, an Oracle implementation. And so it was a lot of kind of the skills that I learn now and I can still use, which is, making presentations, learning about a new technology, and working with clients, taking meeting notes, and just figuring out what the project is about and where to plug myself into.
Awesome. What were some of the similarities between working at Accenture as a consultant and being a tire technician or even being a forklift driver? As you kind of look back at what was similar between, these roles, which, when you look at on the surface, or you couldn't be further apart from each other. I'm sure there's still some similarities that, you could lean on to optimize your career for success.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest one is just double checking everything. So when you're putting tires on somebody's car, you need to make sure that they're not going to fall off, right? So you've got to make sure every lug nut gets back on there. You got to make sure it's torqued correctly, so it's not going to loosen itself back up when they start driving. So being able to double check yourself at each point of changing a tire, there's many different checks that you're going to do, and I think that working in consulting and giving materials or presentations, you need to make sure that everything there is double checked and it's good, because your manager could be the one presenting it, and so they're taking your work and they're trusting that, okay, they've put a lot of thought into this and they've checked everything, so I'm not going to look like I'm presenting something that's inaccurate, right? Or if you do any kind of reporting, you pull any kind of reports on something, you want to make sure that all of that data is accurate and you're not leaving something out. And you've always got to double check that.
So double check your work.
Yeah.
I think that is super important no matter what job you're in. And I think it's great advice for everybody. So thank you for sharing that. Going through kind of your career and all of the roles you had, I'm curious, when you kind of go back to your childhood, what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were a kid? And how do you think your job right now kind of stacks up against that vision?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I had a lot of different ideas. I think I wanted to do something, uh, vaguely creative and something with computers. So I did, as a kid, do a lot of video editing. So maybe more as like a teenager. But with Adobe Premiere Pro or like Adobe Photoshop, I did a lot of like photo editing and video editing. I always thought that was really cool. So maybe some kind of like director or like somebody that edits, big TV shows.
How do you
But I
feel? How do you feel like being a business analyst stacks up? You're directing in a different sort of way, right?
Yeah, in a way, I think there's a lot of opportunities. You have to look for them, right? If somebody tells you like put together an analysis of this data, you may not think this is the next like the wire or something like that. It's not necessarily creative, but you can find a lot of ways to put that together. And when you get into the nitty gritty of like, how am I presenting this? What do I want them to see? Things like that, it can get very like, almost like you're directing something.
Yeah, I mean, a presentation is storytelling at
Yeah.
its core, and getting that right, not just through the narrative, but also through the visuals that you're using. I imagine that there's a lot of good learnings from your time, cutting up videos in Adobe Premiere that you can draw from. Do you still do any video editing?
Not really. They changed their pricing and I can't afford it. So, you know, but yeah, I haven't
Get
lately.
get
But
Accenture to provide the license.
yeah, maybe they used to do where you do like a one-time purchase, I want to say. And so I saved up for a while because I was, as a teenager, I didn't have money and I saved up for a while and I finally got it. And then a couple years later, they did it towards like an annual thing. And I was like, well, you know, it's too much.
Finding monetization opportunities like any digital subscription business, right?
Yeah.
Um, we'll move on a little bit, and I'd love to hear what made you decide to begin pursuing technology. Was there a moment at the tire shop? It sounds like you were looking at this job versus, the air traffic controller job. Like, what was that moment where you said, you know what, I am going to focus and prioritize tech?
Yeah. I think a lot of it is kind of there was so much content out there about what people do in tech. So you could learn about all these different industries because people would, talk about their experiences working somewhere. And I think that was really cool because it made it a little bit more approachable in a way. You could say, like, I can really see myself doing this. And, some people are not always from the same background, right? So some people are doing something completely different, and it kind of lets you know, like, okay, well, if they can do it, I could probably do it too.
And now you get to be one of those people to showcase your story, which is really extraordinary. What was it like early on when you were learning how to code? How did it feel, as you were building something and trying to learn it?
Yeah, I think it was really interesting because at first it did not make too much sense to me. It was a little bit opaque, but then the way that the course was kind of laid out, it starts from, really basic and it just builds on it. So once you take the time to understand the basic of something, it's just building up, right? So it's talking about like what a function is. Here's what a loop is. Well, now you can put a loop in a function and you can build that out. And then it goes all the way to putting together a project. And I remember uh, the first project in the course was like this adventure game. And so you made this adventure game in Python and it was text based. So, it's basically all in the
Like
terminal.
your own adventure.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all in the terminal. So it's very, simple to play. I remember I was super excited to make that. And I had a bunch of different paths and I tried to make it a little bit funny. So I had, as many people as I could like play through it because I was
Yeah.
so excited. Like this is something tangible. They can see like what I've been spending all this time working on. And I thought it was funny. I don't think it was super funny in hindsight, but it was cool to do.
You got to pull it up and, play it again.
Yeah, maybe.
So maybe do it on Twitch and give yourself a grade.
Yeah. Yeah, I can let
Um,
the Twitch chat like play through it. They can choose the numbers and go through
oh,
the scenarios.
that's fun. I'm sure you'd get some great comments, honestly.
Yeah.
Walk us through your routine, studying by day, working at the tire shop by night. What kept you going?
Yeah, so I had been doing college like part-time for a little bit. I'd been going like on and off, and I recently just finished my associate's degree. It took me, I want to say like 6 years. So
Congrats.
thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. So studying part-time had always been something that I never quite lost the habit of, but I think that the motivation was very different for this. Um, just because again, there were so many of these like milestones that it wasn't so much a like discipline aspect as it was like I just want to get through this and see
Yeah.
this through. Um
When did you find
in
the time to do it?
Yeah, I mean you do have to kind of make time for sure. So it depends. For me, as I've been doing, school after work for, I mean, it's been a few years now. I've noticed that I can study a lot better at night, maybe around like 8 or 9 o'clock. And that's just a time that seems to work. I've kind of done everything. I've gotten home from work. I've decompressed. I've probably eaten. And now I can really like sit down and focus. There was a time when I could just go, straight from work to this thing and learn it. But I think you have to be able to kind of change it and
Yeah.
listen to yourself and be like, okay, I know I need to get this done, but I'm gonna find the time after I do this or before I do that.
And you mentioned that, you still find time to learn regularly. What are you trying to learn right now? What's kind of on your roadmap of learning personal growth?
Yeah, so at Accenture, you're really encouraged to learn and like take advantage of the different resources. So we have a lot of trainings and corporate partners where we can get uh content through like AWS or Google, and we can take advantage of that and learn it. So since I've been working, I've gotten, I want to say, 3 or 4 certifications for AWS, Google Cloud, Google Data Analytics, and then one for ServiceNow. So currently, I'm pursuing it's a more like intermediate ServiceNow certificate, and so that's what I'm working on. It's slowed down a little bit just because work got pretty busy, but I'd say that's the most recent.
It's amazing. So you're just racking up certificates and learnings in spaces that you care about, and finding time to do that while balancing a busy work life schedule. So very impressive stuff there. I
Thank you.
love that. That's cool. When did you start to feel like you could actually work in tech and not just learn it? What was that moment where you were like, yeah, I get this. I have a strong point of view and I'm able to add value.
Yeah, I think I mean, as soon as I finished the course, I was like, okay, put me in. I'm ready. Like,
Put me in,
let's,
coach.
yeah, like I'm ready. Put, I'll do whatever. Um, I think, in hindsight, it was probably a couple months after I had begun working. I think I started to see, okay, I'm really good at doing this, and I know I can work on this, but this is how I'll learn it. And I'm getting along with my team, and things are going well. So I think, you know, it took maybe 3, 4 months to really feel like, okay, I belong here. But I think, it wasn't as jarring as I, had maybe initially thought.
Makes sense. Kind of on the flip side of that, I'm sure, particularly either, among the apprenticeship or even before, as you're kind of waiting for that decision, there were moments where you had doubts. I know a lot of our listeners and viewers, are trying to get into this space, and it's natural to have those doubts. So, can you, talk a little bit about what those doubts were like for you and how you were able to manage some of the uncertainty?
Yeah, it was a little bit difficult because you're working with really, really smart people. And so it can be a little bit intimidating when, you hear kind of the qualifications and all the projects that people have worked on before, and, the school that they went to, and all these other things and all their experience. Uh, but at a certain point, that was kind of motivation for me to say, like, well, I'm here and these are my peers. So I need to, make sure that I feel like I fit in here. And if these people are extraordinary, like maybe there's a chance that I'm extraordinary. Like maybe they didn't make a mistake. Maybe I belong here. Um, and so I think just keep tabs too on what you've been doing. And I think pretty soon you'll kind of like realize, okay, you do have some credentials. You do have some really valuable experience, but it's easy when you have that kind of moment of doubting something to think like, well, I haven't really done anything. But if you can keep a list of that and really like look back at it and think about it, you'll realize like, okay, no, I've done some stuff. I've got some reasons to be here.
What does that list look like? Do you have a running tally of, hey, had this great project I delivered, or like what does it look like for you? Is it mental? Is it physical? Is it virtual?
Yeah, so it's actually a little bit of another way that like Accenture is kind of different than other companies, but uh, you always want to get, we call it feedback, where you like kind of work with a manager for a while or your other team, the other people on your team, and you'll request feedback from them, and you have to say like, hey, how have I been doing over the last couple of weeks, or something like that, right? And they can let you know. Or you're supposed to kind of keep, they call them priorities, so it's like a list of like 2 or 3 things you say you're going to finish outside of maybe your normal day-to-day work.
Yeah.
And so that could be like a certification, or that could be um, doing something like an employee resource group, you know? And so all of those are kind of virtual. But then at a certain point, you start like, uh, just being able to phrase it. I think learning how to phrase what you've done is a skill that's very important. Because you could say like, I've delivered value and I've produced these deliverables, but you need to be able to say like very specifically, there was a room, it was 8 people, it was a 40-minute presentation. At first they weren't really buying what we're selling, but now they're on board and we're gonna get moving on this. So being able to yeah, keep that list, and probably virtually, but yeah.
Yeah, for me, I have a Excel sheet that I call my personal stack rank, which is really just a running list of to-dos with a cut line. And, every time I finish a task, I mark it as complete and I move it into kind of the completed backlog, if you will. And so, it ends up being a spreadsheet with hundreds and hundreds of rows, thousands of rows of things that I've done. And I can look back and be like, oh yeah, there's a lot of stuff behind me here. So it's good to see. And I like your approach too. There's a lot of ways to do that. Um,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I feel like I'm sure at most companies they probably have some kind of system where you would sit down with a manager and they, kind of reflect on the work you've done in the last couple of months. So I think having that list and being able to talk about it too is really important, because it serves multiple, purposes.
Yeah, it's helpful too to think about that throughout your life, even outside of work. I think that one of the things you said earlier that stood out to me, Mikey, was when you mentioned that you had to make time for the learning, right? And it's not finding time. You have to make time for it, which means you have to prioritize it. And if you're prioritizing that, that means that you are deprioritizing something else that would have otherwise filled up that time. And so we all have kind of our personal stack rank of things in life and work and everything. And managing that stack rank and figuring out what's really important is kind of an ever moving process, if you will. One thing that, so my background, I have been a magician in my past life. And oftentimes folks ask me if I'm doing magic right now. And, the answer to that question isn't, no, I don't have time for it. It's, no, I'm not doing it right now because I'm not prioritizing it. If I were to prioritize that right now, then I could do it. But it's just not at the top of my stack rank. Let's go ahead and move on to a couple other questions here. What kind of projects get you fired up at work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it really depends because you could be doing a lot of different kinds of projects, but there could be something that you're really interested in doing. So for me, I'm really interested in like data analysis and, kind of making reports and visualizing that. So I think the project could be anything, but I try to find opportunities to do what I want, right? And to make, some kind of reports or put something together that people can look at to get a sense of, the metrics that are going on.
So visualizing data and projects where you can kind of dive into the data and put together an analysis and get people to understand it.
Yeah, definitely.
What tools have you found or what skills have you found to be most valuable in your role?
Yeah, so I think in my role, right, you have to be able to be flexible and learn a lot of different kind of technologies. And so I think the Udacity nano degree really helped prime me for some of that, learning and the ability to switch contexts because the nano degree itself, I mean, it covered HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Python. So that's a lot, right? And they're not completely similar, but there are similarities. And so I think, the idea that you can learn something enough to be fluent and like pick it up and work on it and then move to the next thing has been really important because certain technologies or certain platforms are very similar to each other, right? So, like ServiceNow, it has a reporting module, so does Salesforce. So, if you know how to use filters and you know how to, change columns around and export it, you can get, two similar reports, even if you are not familiar with Salesforce, but you are familiar with ServiceNow.
So just kind of understanding how to use all of these different languages has also made it more accessible for you to use different software tools, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Just being able to pick up like what is the goal behind it? What is the main thing that they're trying to do? And what are these things that they have in common? It's really helpful.
How often do you find something like a bug or an issue where you're like, hey, you should have this because the other platform has it and you don't? What's going on?
Yeah, well, I thought it was a little bit interesting because, like, for example, the Salesforce example, like exporting it was really easy, but in ServiceNow, it's actually a little bit trickier. It's not a button that you can see. You have to click in a certain place. You have to right click in a certain place and then like export it, which is really weird. So it's kind of like you're used to doing it in a way that's, a little bit off. And then you see, oh, this is actually easier here. And I think also, in consulting, you're seeing all these different applications. And so, AWS or Google Cloud, they both have a lot of different cloud offerings, but it's interesting to see how they're going about it. And one's doing it like this and the other's
Yeah.
doing it like that. And you're kind of like, well, I'm kind of used to doing it this way. Why do I have to go through these hoops to do it, another way?
They each have teams of product managers that are talking to their customers and figuring out what they need, and then prioritizing the right features based on what they're hearing. So,
Yeah, it's pretty
I
interesting. Oh, sorry.
yeah,
Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say it's pretty interesting because sometimes clients have done things a certain way with a certain platform, and then you're offering them the new solution, and it doesn't have this old thing that they used to use all the time, and they're like, "Well, we used to be able to do this. Why can't we
We
do
want
that?"
to stay. Yeah.
And you're like, "Well, I don't know. I mean, we can ask them, but it could take a couple months. Like it could take a couple months. You don't know when it's gonna come out. So
Or you just right click on this button that you can't see, and then
yeah, exactly.
what advice would you give someone working a blue collar job who dreams of breaking into tech?
Yeah, I think just being able to explain what you've done and like how we were talking earlier, being able to explain what you've done and tell a story is really important because maybe not all of your experiences are going to line up with what you need to do in a tech environment, but if you can show I've been able to learn this or I've been able to handle these situations, it's you're telling that story and you're showing that you bring a unique perspective that's really valued.
Great. What advice would you give someone working a blue collar job who dreams of breaking into tech?
Yeah, I think the perspective that you have, even if you can't see how exactly it translates to a tech job, you're going to realize that those experiences can help you out and you can call on that later on. And so as long as you're able to put that story together and explain like I have the ability to learn or I have the ability to solve these problems or talk to customers this way, that's always going to be valuable, right? So you don't have to know how to like
Yeah.
center a div on a web page. You can talk about, a million other things that you've gotten from that other experience.
Yeah, it's a great point. When I was interviewing with Amazon early on in my career, one of my interview stories was on a decision I made to import Italian playing cards for the magic shop. And it's like one of those things that has absolutely nothing to do with tech, but it's about kind of communicating the values that you have and how you think about decisions and the trade-offs and all of those things, whether you're working in a blue collar job, whether you're working in retail, whatever it be. There's just a ton of overlap in all of these different employments out there, or jobs out there. It's probably a better way to put it. Any interview tips for folks who are trying to break in?
Yeah, practice as much as you can. That's a huge one. I think the mock interviews from Udacity really helped because they did, a behavioral interview and they also did a technology interview. And so that was a really new experience for me because you're taking a project and you're breaking it down, line by line. They're asking you these questions that, you know, I didn't realize I had to explain why I did something a certain way. It just ended up working that way. So I was like, let's go with that. Um, but I thought that was really good practice because you'll do that a lot when you get a job in tech. You'll have to explain why did you do this like that? What was your thinking behind it? And I think also if you can try to talk to people who may have that job, and if you can't talk to them, maybe watch those videos where people explain their experience because the way that somebody who's been working at a certain company talks about it, those are kind of insights that you can take into the interview and you can see like for Accenture, I'm talking about the certifications that I'm getting in the variety, right? So you can talk about, well, I am able to learn these things and I've spent a lot of time being having a diverse skill set.
I think that's golden advice, honestly. It also sets up the interview. So when you're telling them a story, you can do it through the lens of the job that you're interviewing for and using the language that they use to talk about that job. And it's now so much easier for the interviewer to look at you and say, oh, yeah, I can visualize this person in that role.
Yeah,
They see,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's amazing advice. Thanks for sharing that. What do you think people misunderstand most about what it takes to get into tech?
Yeah, I think so many people think you have to be incredibly specialized. You have to have, a really in-depth knowledge about software engineering. And there are plenty of roles where that is something that's required, right? But I think that there are plenty of routes and opportunities for people who are, fluent in tech, and they know how to speak the language and they know how to talk about it, but maybe they do project management or they do sales. They could do change management, which I think is really interesting. It's, you've rolled out the technology to the end users, and now you need to get the end users comfortable with this new thing. I mean, that's not necessarily super technical. It's more of like a people thing. The same way with training. So I think that there's a lot of ways to get involved where you're not the one behind the keyboard, maybe doing all of this coding. You're not pushing these features out, but you're still really important. And these are all functions that have to happen for everything to come together.
Yeah, agreed. It takes all types, it doesn't take a single kind of person to build
Yeah.
a great and successful tech company. What tools, resources, and programs were most helpful to you in your learning journey?
Yeah. I mean, of course, Udacity, right? Because not only was it just the content and learning, it was also a lot of different experiences within that, right? So you're doing the learning and you're picking up these different skills, but you're also practicing them. You're doing these projects, you're doing the interview training, you're building your resume, you're doing, all of these other really important kind of ancillary aspects that you don't think are going to help you out, or maybe you don't see how exactly they come together, but they do. And so I think that that's really important. I think also maybe more specific, if anybody's doing certifications in particular, if there's an exam, you should try to find like practice exams, because that's going to help you a lot. It's the same way with like
Yeah.
a mock interview gives you the questions. Doing a practice exam will help you get familiar with those kinds of questions and what do the answers look like? You know, what do the correct answers have in common? What do the incorrect answers have in common?
It gives you a ballpark too of where you're at, so you can kind of,
Yeah.
understand where you're standing to start with, and then work up from there.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I promised to our listeners that we did not pay Mikey to promote Udacity so much, but glad to hear that we were such an important part of your journey. I think that's really neat, and frankly, uh, stories like yours are the why behind a lot of our jobs. So thank you for sharing that. We're gonna wrap to the next segment, which we're gonna call the pivot point. Think of it as your personal highlight reel from your journey. So, a couple questions here. Looking back on your career shift, when did you decide to pivot? Was there a moment you knew things had to change?
Yeah, I think it's kind of tough because I had always known that I wanted to do something different. Um, but I think it was definitely a shift in mindset when I realized the opportunities that I had once I got here. So for instance, I've been able to like go to college now and I've been able to pay for that, or I've been able to think about getting a master's degree or getting these certifications and doing this learning. So I think there was kind of a pivot in what I could see myself doing in the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. What was the single hardest moment, and what did you do to push through it?
That's tough. I mean, maybe the interview. I
Yeah,
think the whole process, it's probably difficult for everybody in their own unique ways, but I think the waiting was pretty tough and just not knowing.
lots of anxiety around
Yeah.
that. That anxiety breeds challenges. What was the moment you finally thought, I belong in tech?
Yeah, I mean, specifically, it was probably when I really owned a certain kind of like task. So there was one point where it had a go live of a project, right? So we had implemented this technology and the end users were using it and they were, kind of reporting on it, doing their daily workflows in it. And so we had a service now set up to where if they have issues with the rollout, they would log a ticket. And so me and another analyst put together like a lot of reports around that. And it was kind of like, you guys can do whatever with this. Like, we just need to know how many per day, how many are they closing, and what kind of issues. After that, you can really go crazy. And so being able to take that and iterate on it and learn these new things was really cool because it was exporting this list of reports from ServiceNow and finding the button, to export the list, and then using Excel to clean up the data, then putting it into Power BI, then putting it into PowerPoint, and then showing people and getting the feedback of like, could you move it here? Could you show us this? Could you do that? And so when I realized like I really liked putting this together, I really liked working on this, it was when I kind of thought like, okay, I'd love to do this and I'd love to do, more things like it and get the chance to work on stuff like that.
Just delivering the project, it sounds
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
I like it. If you could text your past self one message on the day you started learning to code, what would it say?
Yeah, I think it would be kind of what you were speaking about earlier of prioritizing, um, where you need to make time, you need to prioritize certain things. And I think that, giving myself that nudge of like, you're going to get it as long as you take the time. I think that would have been really helpful at cutting down some of the uncertainty.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's great advice for all of us, right? Something that we can all remind ourselves of even every day, because there's always those moments where you're like, I'm so underwater. And it's like, okay, take a step back.
Yeah.
What's the most important thing? What needs to get done? What's urgent? What's important? And just answering those questions usually like makes you feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
Last one for you. For someone listening who dreams of breaking into tech but feels stuck, what's your advice?
Yeah. I think just be able to learn a lot and be a sponge. I know that like at Accenture, especially, they really value people that can be a sponge and just take in everything. And if you work on one project and you need to be moved and they really need people on another one, are you going to be able to pick up that work and do something else? So I think having the ability to learn a lot of different things and being able to showcase that you can learn a lot of things will really help.
Great advice. And a great place to end. Mikey, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. Congratulations on all of your success. Like I said, I think your story is incredibly inspiring. So thrilled to be able to share it with our listeners and our viewers. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share it, and thanks for talking to me today.
You bet. Talk soon.
All right, bye.